Thank you, Kirk, for that introduction. I read an article back in the fall talking about exactly what Kirk was mentioning, the prevalence of conversation. And the article, maybe you read this in the weekly email that I sent out, referenced the Joe Rogan podcast. Now, I'm curious, how many of you listen to Joe Rogan? Anybody want to raise their hand? A couple of you, okay. It's all a conversation. This is the most popular podcast in the world, reaching millions of people, and all the guy does is bring on guests and have conversations. And I thought, couldn't we do that for a sermon? You know, there's nothing in the Bible that says that there needs to be a worship service with a pastor who gives a monologue. It's just not in the Bible. And yet, what have we done for centuries? Pastors giving monologues. Why? Well, it just goes back to that history of oratory and this idea that maybe God is speaking through a person and so on and so forth. But we don't have to do that. And in fact, in some ways, it may be detrimental. Why do you need to hear from me all these Sundays? Don't other people have voices too? Yes, they do. So I was intrigued by this, and I reached out to Joel and Dusty. And the reason why is because last year, primarily it was Dusty's impetus, but the three of us started our own podcast. And we did an entire season of 8 episodes. Maybe some of you even listened to it. It's called The Unapologetic Journey. And I'm not going to talk too much about that for now. But I thought, what if we could bring the dynamic of the conversation that we have into a sermon and situation in a church? Because when the three of us got together and had those conversations, I was just amazed at how I felt the Spirit at work. I mean, you can listen to them. They're all online, and we'd be glad for you to listen to them and see what you think. They were raw. They were honest. They were sometimes hilarious. Just talking about, usually we had a theme, and then we would try and riff off of that theme. And I thought, maybe we can do that and experiment. And I thank you, because over the years, Faith Church has been very gracious as we have experimented with so many things. And so we have another experiment for you today. Now, for those of you, I know pretty much everybody here knows Joel, because Joel has grown up in our church and a very big part of it. Dusty has also grown up in Faith Church, but he was away for quite a while he served in the Navy and then was working out in the Midwest, and has only recently come back. And so some of you might not know Dusty, but I wanted to just invite you guys in. So I'm going to turn it over to Dusty. He's going to kick things off for us, and we're just going to talk. And we hope that the Holy Spirit works through this conversation.
Yes. Thank you for that, Joel. I do see some, let me slow down. I do see some familiar faces out there. I am Dusty Zook. I'm a bit of an oddball, so thank you for inviting me up here to speak to you guys. I think pretty much just, what happened was I was in a change in my life, and I reached out to Joel Keim and said, hey, I feel like I have a gift. I don't know what it would be. Can you help me with that? And then the podcast was birthed from that. So, again, like I said, I'm an oddball. I like to allow myself to be influenced by the macabre, if you will. And one day I'm sitting in a church service in Virginia where I was stationed, and it was talking about purpose. And it struck me as I'm to be paying attention to the pastor, wow, I'm kind of built like a toilet plunger, and I kind of relate to toilet plungers, because of the tutelage of Sandy Good. Most of you might know him, Joel's father-in-law. He uses poop as a lot of his metaphors and analogies.
Specifically diarrhea.
Diarrhea, yes.
He does.
Yes.
I just need to interrupt. You guys know my job's on the line here.
Well, you invited me, so you knew that could be a possibility.
But in the beginning there, it just sounded like you just gave your 2-week notice to this whole monologue thing. So
I don't know what you're talking about.
I was prepped on the fact that some people might not know me, so ease you into this. But, so Yes, I'm a toilet plunger, and I had made the connection that I am God's toilet plunger because it always seemed like in my life I was shoved into the toilet of crap. We all face it. We all go through things. Young man, remind me of your name again? Kirk. Kirk did a really good job at setting me up for this because I'm going through a lot of stress and anxiety in my life at the moment with my mother. I might start crying, just laugh at me and throw things. Back in November, she had an aneurysm. She actually had 4 aneurysms, 1 ruptured. She had 2 strokes, a bunch of blood clots, a lot of medical complications. She is now home. She's doing well. She's assisted. She can't do anything on her own. Again, to go with the poop metaphor, I never thought I'd be changing my mom's diaper, but I'm happy to do so. And it's something that I really had to calm myself down, and I really had to evaluate what was going on in life because some of you know my mom. This is the most quiet she's been in her 62 years of life. Most still she's ever been. She can't do anything. And, when the strongest woman in your life goes down, you question a lot of things, right? And I did. I mean, I think I've been the most vulnerable I've ever been in my life, and it's just because I don't have my mom, She does all the talking for you. She does all the heavy lifting. She does all the thinking, and now we got to do that for her. So since I'm easily influenced by movies, I was thinking one day, as I'm watching Deadpool and Wolverine, what is the art of slow motion like? Because in that movie, if you haven't seen it, you're not really missing much. I like it because I like the actors. There's a lot of slow motion scenes in that, right? And we see it in movies all the time. When Hans Gruber falls out of Takanomi Tower, we see the drama in it, right? When any Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson movie, he's walking away from an explosion with his eyebrow raised, we see the drama, we see the excitement, we see everything going on, right? But if you stop and look at it, a lot of us, we go into panic mode. I know I did. November 11th, I'll never forget it. It was the day that my mom had her aneurysm. And within an hour of her being admitted to the ER, she had rapid deterioration, which meant she went from being her to being this wild animal. It took 5 of us to hold her down in the hospital bed. And that was just a moment where after all of it happened, I had to step back and I cried. I mean, I broke down like I'm going to do now. I broke down in the hallway of the ER and I just cried. I'm like, what is going on? What are we facing, right? But one thing that stood out about that specifically was right before my mom had this deterioration, clear as day, the last coherent thing she said was, "God, I put it in your hands." And, I haven't been the most rock-solid Christian. I do believe, and I give God credit and praise, and, I know that he's in my life. And, it was that one moment, like, she could have said anything. She has a very colorful vocabulary. And she could have said anything, but she gave it to God, and then she was out. And now she's home, and she's fighting, So thinking about this slow motion theory, if you will, why do we go into panic mode? As Christians, why do we not raise our hands to God? Why do we not immediately go to him? Well, when you're in those slow motions, it's for a reason. It's so you can collect yourself. When poop is hitting the fan, when everything's breaking loose, when explosions are happening, why do we see these action stars walk away from it? Well, I think for me, it's a time to collect themselves. Because after they walk away from it, sometimes you'll see a triumphant return to the disaster, a slow motion return to it, and they're approaching it. Why? Because they gave themselves time to think about what was going on. Specifically in Wolverine and Deadpool, I don't know why I think it's just because I was so emotional at the time. I went home after a long day with my mom at the hospital. I watched it, and there were 3 scenes that's like, okay, well, I can gear myself up for this. I don't have to rush around. I don't have to be a superhero, right? All I got to do is just think about what's going on. And what got me the most was I finally wasn't holding things in. One of the scenes, you just see a magnificent display of cinematic master, whatever the word is, And it's Wolverine just letting out all of his angst and his emotion, right? If you want to see the movie, please see it. If not, there's a storyline where he is the last X-Men on Earth, right? And he's just letting out this emotion. And that's what I've been doing now, right? And that's why this podcast has been so big, and that's why I'm telling you guys this, like, take your time. Walk away from whatever it is, collect yourself, and then get right back in it. What's your name again, young man? Kirk. Like you said, just when you have anxiety, when you have things in your life, it's not the end, right? It's just it's a stepping stone. You can overcome this. And I've learned a lot about myself. I've learned a lot about my mom. I learned a lot about my stepdad, who didn't have to do a single thing because my mom did it all, and now he's a rock star. So like there's a lot of positive in these situations. So take your time, let it blow up behind you, think about what's going on, and then get right back in the fight and kick its butt.
So let me ask, though, when you're talking about taking your time and letting it out, what was that? Prayer? Was it just crying? What was it?
Well,
How do you do it?
I took up crocheting and puzzling. I didn't. But no, so yeah, prayer. I mean, I leaned on you guys heavily. I'm pretty sure, if you heard Bev or Dusty, that's me and my mom.
Text message, prayer,
yeah.
text chain.
So yeah, I mean, I relied heavily on the prayer warriors, and we saw it. We had everybody praying for us. I had Nebraska praying for us. We had Florida, California, North Carolina, Tennessee. We had all sorts of people praying for us, and and there was a time where my mom had her 2 strokes. And I just went out in my truck, and my steering wheel took the brunt of it. But, I just let it out, right? Because I didn't know what to do. So, yeah, I mean, it could be anything. Like, hey, grab a puzzle, kick a rock. Not a big one, unless you're wearing steel toe. But just whatever.
You remind me that one of the things that we've talked about at Faith Church over the years is lament. And in the Psalms of Lament, we read these psalmists who are overcome with emotion, just letting it out to the Lord. The classic phrase in the Psalms of Lament, you see it in Psalm 13, "How long, O Lord?" where we are so overcome with the intensity of the situation, just like Dusty described about that with his mom. And maybe you've been there before, where you're just crying out to God, "How long, O Lord, are you going to allow this to happen?" Where a lament is a holy complaint. It's not a lacking of faith where you're turning your back on God. It's a faithful reaching out for more of God because you're so overwhelmed that you don't know what else to do, and you let the emotion out because He can handle it. He wants us to give ourselves completely over to Him, whether it's the pain, the hurt, the fear, the anxiety, all of it. And I think about the times when I don't mean to. I think I can say this, where Dusty reached out to me and said, "I'm struggling." And we just got together and we prayed together and talked. It was lament. And that I encourage you to, if you're in one of those situations where you're just feeling overwhelmed, open up the Psalms. You can even start at Psalm 13. Psalm 88 is another one where it is dark. It's one of those rare psalms where there's no resolution. He says, "Darkness is my only friend," at the very end. It's kind of amazing to me that's even in the Bible.
Yeah.
Typically, we want a resolution. We want
Right.
it to be, I'm pain, I'm struggling, I'm hurting, but God, you're great and you're good. Not Psalm 88. And I'm glad it's in the Bible. I'm glad that there's that level of honesty, of pain before God. Go ahead.
Well, and I think to go with that lament, I thought that was what's on the floor, but that's a laminate. But in those times too, like people that I knew, David Menning, I didn't know he worked at LGH, but he does. And the one day I saw him pushing his little cart around, I just ran up and hugged him, and he met me in the cafeteria the one time, and he prayed for me, and he prayed with me, and he talked to me, and we just reconnected. And I haven't seen David in years, so like God puts people in your life that also help you lament. Work through what's going on. And I ran into high school friends, Bob and Ruth Feltman. Unfortunately, Bob was in the hospital, but I ran up and I met them and talked to them, and Ruth and Bob prayed for us. And, it was a great experience. And, the reason why I think all that happened is because I was living in that darkness at the time, and, I just wasn't trying to run away from it.
Yeah, and thinking about that, like that's how God works. If we, like you said, like you haven't been a rock star Christian, and I mean, if we're honest, I don't think any of us are. But God, if we have asked Him into our lives, and we love Him and He loves us, like no matter what we do, He's going to be there. So like the lamenting and like just the situations we're in, like you can't plan for your recovery. You can't say, oh, like if a family member becomes sick, this is how I'm going to react. I'll go to prayer right away and it'll be all okay. And that's just not reality. Like you're going to freak out. You're going to, kick things, hit things, say terrible things, and act out, whether it's lamenting or just rage. I mean, but God's there, and God's almighty, and yes, He places people there for us. And I think like Kirk hit on a conversation. Like throughout the podcast, I had mentioned if there's something that's not being talked about, that's what needs talked about. So if you're in the darkness and you're just sitting in it and not talking about the darkness to anybody else and having a conversation about it, you're going to stay there. And so, yeah.
Well, I think it's also important too. Again, I'm an oddball. I just find things and make connections to it. John Michael Montgomery once sang, "Life's a dance you learn as you go. Sometimes you'll lead, sometimes you'll follow. But don't worry about what you don't know, because life's a dance you'll learn as you go." Whatever reason, that sticks with me, and I usually say that a lot, and it's true. Like, I'm learning how to take care of my mom, who took care of me. I'm learning how to take care of my stepdad, who watched my mom take care of me. No, I'm kidding. He was very vital in my life. And then I'm leaning on my friends and everybody, and, it's just like, I didn't know how to handle this when I was younger. If this would have been me at 18, gosh, I don't know where I would be. Yeah, but now that I'm a 30-year-old looking like an 18-year-old, I'm a little more seasoned and I'm a little more in tune to handle these things. And it's because of the church. It's because of everybody that you bring into your life. And, yeah, so... And we're all going through things. I don't know, do you guys have any updates? I know we talked briefly about some other things.
Yeah, I know. And again, we don't come in with scripts or anything, but Joel gave us like 2 ideas. But that's about the limit that we can handle.
He knows that's challenging for me.
This is very ad lib.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll chime in. And Joel, when you mentioned about lamenting and going to the Bible, again, I know this has come up like with my experience and the way I kind of evaluate my interaction with life has been around more of the unchurched. So Joel suggested I bring up my new job, which I will do. But just in life with like my hunting buddies, a lot of them are unchurched, and that's been like kind of my mission field. But as you can tell, I don't think you've seen any of my hunting buddies come in the church. But I know God's at work, and it may take many more years, but that's...
Think about that. I just was talking with someone who said that they lived next door to a couple, and they wanted to reach out to their next door neighbor. And so they invited her to dinner. And it took 380 dinners until that next door neighbor finally said something like, I want to learn more about this Jesus. Something to think about.
Yeah.
Life's a dance, y'all.
Yeah, so like taking scripture and the Bible into the hunting blind, it wouldn't go anywhere. Like it's a group that just doesn't interact with that, whether they know a little bit or none. It would have put up a wall for the intention that I had. I did it once, and it was about a verse in the Bible, I forget, but it mentioned cormorants. And if you don't know what a cormorant is, it's a bird, and you're not allowed to shoot them. And so I made a joke to the hunting buddies who understand that part of it. I'm understanding the whole rest of the verse in the chapter. And so it started a conversation, and then that quickly went it just got away from me. And it's comical, but then it was like, you know, I didn't get anywhere with the guys. But they were hunting, so we're killing animals. Like, sorry to break the news, but that's what it is. And
Well, did you find whatever that word is? Did you shoot one?
cormorant?
Yeah.
No, that'd be illegal.
Oh, good. So you do have some couth.
Yes.
Okay.
But it got to the point where we'd shoot some geese, and then they said, "Oh, that bird got Christed." And I sat there and I'm like, wait, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And I'm trying to contemplate this whole phrase that they created on their own about Christing something. And I'm like, it can be good. Like if you put it in the aspect of us growing in a relationship with Christ, but making it a verb, I don't know.
Why did they say that? Because Jesus was crucified?
No, because they killed it and sent it to heaven. So they believe the animals go to heaven, but they Christed it. So you can play with that how you want, but
You might need to find a new hobby.
but that's where that conversation ended on that hunt. I was just like, all right, we'll try again next time. But then in the workplace, I work in construction. I had been out on my own for a while, and it just wasn't taking ground. Like, you know, I'm talking to guys out on their own. They're making over $100,000 a year, and their life's peachy, not cheap. It's actually very expensive on your own. But their life's peachy, and I'm like, that's what I want. I want freedom of my schedule, and I want to charge what I want to charge, and be complete control of a project that is all mine. So it sounds greedy, and it was. So when our daughter, Heather's my wife, she's here, and I had her sign a statement that I can say whatever I want.
I didn't sign one.
You're not married to her.
Oh, right.
We're a three-wheeler. Okay, sorry. Yes, thank you.
Again, you have to know
where
us.
was I going with that? This is how it happens, our podcast.
Work, babe.
Yeah. So in the construction field, again, not a faith-based environment, but I'm trying to be that light in the dark. And it's not all dark. I've already been surprised by like these young 18-year-olds that are coming into the workforce, and this one kid just started talking about Jesus and how he did a podcast with his church. I'm like, the way you were talking today, I would not have expected that. So it's just that like real life, like I'm not bringing the scripture in the Bible to work, and I'm not taking my lunch break to preach to my coworkers and stuff, but I'm just being there, being true to myself. I'm not, you know, falling down into the, you know, conversations of, you know, typical construction workers if you've been around it. But I think, you know, I'm praying, and it does feel like people are already noticing that I'm a little bit different than the typical construction guy.
May I interject?
You always do.
Sit up straight here for me. So this young man in high school was, I think, the pinnacle of what a young man in high school should be, right? You may not be able to tell, you may not agree, he's handsome. He was very athletic. Everybody wanted to be his friend. Everyone liked him. But he was a true Christ-based kid. And I can say that because I was not. And Joel decided to take me in as his friend, which he could have had anybody as his friend. He chose me. So, I'm the one laughing last. But Joel did a really good job in high school at, you know, sticking true to his Christian faith. And I think, you know, I've seen him grow. We've been friends for what, 5 years? 18 years?
25?
25 years. And, you know, like Joel's really, he was that, you know, ideal pinnacle Christian kid. You know, he didn't do anything wrong. Everyone wanted to be around him. But just be quiet, it's my time. But he really grew as a person throughout the years, because there's a story out there that whenever I needed to go to the mechanic, Joel would never drive me because he didn't want to drive to Mannheim. He wanted me to go to Ronks because Mannheim was too far. Well, quickly, I will say quickly, that mindset changed, and, you know, no distance was too far for Joel to go for his friends. So I just wanted to say that. What's going on here, by the way? I've never seen you with facial hair.
Oh, I forgot.
Yeah, he must have fell in the dirt. Anyway, go ahead.
Man, thank you. Yeah, I think just being in an environment of like non-believers, like that's where I feel like I shine, where like, you know, I'm not as well versed in Bible verse memory and just stuff like that. So it's just being real where we are. And you know, Joel is really emphasizing this disciple, being a disciple of Jesus, and that's what we should be. We're called to do that. And you know, as I'm wrestling with all the stuff that's going on, it's like, you know, Jesus didn't have the physical Bible to preach to everybody, and he went out and preached and taught, and he was just out among the fishermen, the taxpayers, the soldiers. He was in it, in the real life. So I kind of really grabbed onto that, like that's what I want to do. I feel confident most times. It's still intimidating if you haven't experienced trying to be the one to initiate, you know, Jesus or God conversations with non-believers, especially a non-believer that's like an aggressive non-believer. Like they just look at the world as, well, I was born here, I'm going to die here, and I want to have as much fun as possible while I'm here. And you know, that my first experience of that was in the National Guard. You know, a really good leader in our platoon, but just like, you know, a beast of a man, and like this whole like Viking background stuff, and Odin is his savior or whatever. And he mentioned to me, we got to talking about Jesus, and he's like, oh, well, your king died on a tree. Like look at that. And it hurt me. I was like, oh, like that's not fair. Like that's not right. Like, and I just wanted to come back with something, like I couldn't. I don't know, I was probably 20, 21 at the time. And like, I just didn't have, and not that you know, Jesus didn't need me to defend him. But it was a wake up call to me of like, okay, like I need to be more, you know, experienced in the Bible, or just know that God, like ask God to give me confidence. It was the confidence that I lacked. Because Jesus dying on a tree for us was the ultimate. That was his power. That was God's power. That his perfect son was sacrificed for our sins. And there's just, you know, I could have sat that guy down. Like if he was here now, I could sit him down and just pour it all out to him right now. But at that time, it was just such a shocking like statement. And it was, yeah, it caught me off guard. But
And to that end, that's a good transition to what we're going to be talking about in our class, the Word and Deed class. I invite you to stay for that, because I think so many of us have that exact same experience that you just described. Even if we've been adults and we've thought about Jesus and are faithful to Jesus for many years, we can have a hard time. What do we say? Even if we're in the middle of a work environment or with our neighbors, what do we say? One of the things that Faith Church was involved in years ago was the Lighthouse movement, and it had 3 words: prayer, care, and share. And I really appreciate that. And we're going to talk about that in the class. And I think because of our time, we're going to have to maybe finish with this. But we know we can pray for people, that God works in their lives, that they would come to know him. We can care for them and reach out to them and express the love of Christ. That's the deed part. But man, is it hard to actually say anything about Jesus. Because what comes to mind? What if I say the wrong thing? I don't know enough. I don't know enough verses. What if they ask me a question that I don't know the answer to, and I'm not faithful in my representation, and I actually turn the guy away? And so what do? We end up saying nothing out of fear. Prayer, care, share says that we pray for them, we care for them, and then we do share something. We have a story of the incredible love of God, both in what you mentioned about he gave his son to die for us, but also what he's done in our lives. And so we're going to talk about that more in the class. I encourage you to stay for that, and what it could look like for us to carry that mission of prayer, care, and share in the people in our lives. So, thanks, guys. I hope this
no,
was
thank you.
meaningful in some way. I think this was maybe the smorgasbord approach of preaching, where we put out a whole bunch of stuff, and maybe there was a little something that God could use to minister to you today. So.
Yeah, no, thank you for, did anybody know this was happening? I know you sent out
I sent the weekly email, but beyond that, nope.
So, thank you for your laughs and your time. We appreciate it. I know, I've done that too, where, I'm at my low and I pray for people and they really respond to it and they like it. So, it definitely has a lot of gravity and a lot of weight to it, because people respect when you have this interaction, when you sit down and you're just an average Joel, you just relate to people and people love it. So go out there and be an oddball. Don't be like me, but be your version of an oddball.
Yeah, and I think overall it's a long-term game, not game. It's long-term. It's life. It takes time to build relationships and to be comfortable in yourself and confident in yourself. But just always trust in God, and He'll make it work. We won't.
Yeah, I've heard the term, this is a marathon, not a sprint, and 380 dinners. I mean, it takes time, and, take that slow motion break to really just think about what's going on and control yourself and evaluate yourself and what's going on. And you can kick butt. Anybody can, especially when you got God behind you. So, thank you.
I just want to say I'm so proud of these two guys. Known each other for a long time. I met Joel Lacey when he was a 5th grader. Dusty came a few years later in youth group, and I just think it's so cool to see how God's at work in your lives. Thank you for joining me in this.
We will have autographs in the back.
Let me pray.